It's recording, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Casey, and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about the English only movement, which is something that I actually haven't really heard as, of being an official like movement in place or official setting in place until our class. So, what the English only movement is, it's also referred to as or known as the official English movement. And these were efforts put into place by federal and state governments, lobbyist organizations, and private citizens who believe that English should be the dominant language of, that particular region. Um, this really isn't a new concept. This kind of dates back to the 1800s, actually, in California, with the divide between Spanish and English, particularly in classrooms. Um, so the first start of the movement actually can be seen all the way back into the 1800s, where English actually was made the official language for, a long time in a lot of bilingual programs. While they were supported over the years, they kind of started to diminish. But someone in particular, John Tanton, he's an activist in reducing immigration levels in the United States. And he's actually written books titled The Immigration Invasion and Rethinking Immigration Policy. So clearly this guy is not for immigrants, particularly people who do not speak English. So this is a popular movement during large flows of immigration, economic hardship and war. And now I'm just going to get into some of the questions here, because we have, as Americans, we're known to be prideful and patriotic and all of those things. And I think that this is a good conversation going off of kind of what we discussed in class yesterday, as far as what are some of our feelings on immigration as a whole. But now my podcast today, I just want to focus on how do we feel about English only or bilingual instruction in the classroom, and what we think, what we're for and what we're against. But some of the citizens, the private citizens' feelings who really were for the English only movement, or the official English movement, felt that it was a sense of patriotism and pridefulness and respect for our own country, that we keep our language as is and, remain dominant in not only our classrooms, but, for example, you go to Walmart in Mount Olive, and it's almost rare to hear people speaking English around you. It's so, common for us to hear Spanish around in our region. So I think that a lot of people weren't okay with this, such as John Tanton, who is someone who is completely against what he calls invasion of immigrants. So there's a split between people in the U.S., even so today, who, are for others coming into our country who don't necessarily speak our language very well, or don't necessarily speak our English language at all. And then on the flip side of that, others are completely not okay with it and think it's racist and discriminatory and so on. But there's a lot of controversy in the classroom as a whole of, should we have bilingualism in our classroom? Should that be taught? Should we transfer, an English only instruction delivery in our classes? And I just want to know what your thoughts are on that. There's been a lot of research that shows that there's negative effects on English only. And then, on the flip side of that, there's statistics and test scores that say that, students who don't speak the English language perform quite negatively on the standardized tests than others. And I mean, that's quite, kind of self-explanatory there. If they're being tested in something that's not their language, they're not going to understand it. So my question is it fair for students who don't speak English to come into our classrooms and be expected to, be taught on the same radar as everyone else, especially in the younger grades. Preschool to kindergarten, first grade, second grade are those really fundamental times for our brains to, create the foundation and the mold of success even in our high school years. So that, I think that just goes to show that what we do as teachers in the early years of our lesson delivery and things like that of nature are really important. So it's kind of an up in the air controversial issue of, should English only be the only language taught? Because, if you've ever been on an observation in somewhere like Wayne County, you'll know that at least at Carver Elementary, the minority seems to be white individuals. And, there's Hispanics mainly who don't necessarily speak very well English. So are we putting those students at a disadvantage? Let's flip it around and say, what if we as Americans heavily migrated to Mexico and those places, and we only spoke English? How would they feel about, quote unquote, going out of their way to teach us their language so we could be successful in their country? So what are our thoughts on that? Do we agree or do we disagree with the English only movement? And why or why not?
Picking off you, Casey, just talking about how we would feel if we went into Mexico or somewhere, and just looking up the English only movement and doing research about Mexico and their languages. They have multiple languages. They have a lot of different ways people speak, but yet they make Spanish I guess you could say their main one, but yet they let there's other languages in with that. And just, I guess you could say, playing devil's advocate with this, if you think like now, like you say, we could go anywhere. I can go to a little town I'm close by, and the majority of people there is Hispanic. And yeah, they speak a whole different language, and I guess it can be frustrating at times because you don't know if they're talking about you. You don't know what they're saying or something like that. But just thinking about as where we are as a country, shifting around, maybe we could just like make English the national language or whatever, but I don't feel like you could really take out Spanish altogether just by saying this. To hear me out, because I don't want to be like, oh my gosh, you don't.
No, it's interesting that you say that.
Just thinking back, like in 1968, there was a Bilingual Education Act, and then Lau and Nichols in 74, this guaranteed that English learners access to equivalent education. So they were saying that they won't get the same education. And looking at our classes today, it could be, how about if they take away the accommodations for a special needs child, or how about if they take away the accommodations for another child that needs more time because they're slow or don't understand it. I feel like definitely with the lower grades, maybe I wouldn't take it out. I wouldn't say take it out altogether, and this is just playing devil's advocate because you don't know where them kids are at. I hate to say, let's have everybody speak Spanish, because there's no way. We're America. We're going to speak English. It's like if we go to Mexico, we're going to be speaking Spanish. But it's hard to really, this day and age, the way everything is, it's hard to really say you want to take away Spanish altogether, because, I mean, in hindsight, just looking at it, a child that come from Mexico, we can sit there and say, hey, how are you? And they're not going to have no clue what we're saying. So if we just throw them in a class with a bunch of English-speaking people, say, for us, since you throw me in a class in Mexico and talk to me, I'm like, well, what are you saying? And it's going to frustrate me. And it is going to be to the point that I don't want to be there. And then I just could lead to dropouts and everything else. So this day and age, I feel like fighting fire with fire per se, because if we take Spanish or the bilingualism away out of the classroom, then basically you're taking away that child's accommodation to help them mainstream into English. And then if we take that away, then it's going to be a domino effect. Well, we need to take this away if we're going to take that away, because if you notice, as a society, if you take one thing away, then you got a bunch of people, well, that's not right, that's not fair. If we're going to take this away, we need to take that away. And I feel like it's going to cause a domino effect of bad things if we take. I'm hearing an echo, so I'm sorry. I got to think about it.
Yeah, we hear it too.
It's like, oh my gosh. Just looking back at that, if you take away all that, then I feel like you're going to have people, well, we need to take away this because that's not fair. We need to take away that because that's not fair. And I feel like this day and time, that's how the society is. If you're going to take away one, you need to take away everything. And I feel like it's going to be a spiraling effect, because, as I was stating earlier, if it's like taking away taking away the ESL classes in our classrooms, for, say, in America, that's basically saying, okay, well, this child here don't need his accommodations, or this child here don't need that. I feel like it's just taking away an accommodation that child needs to succeed, because definitely in those Bilingual Education Act and others, if you look at it, it states that it's helping them get the same level of academics and being able to succeed. So I mean, just like I said, playing devil's advocate, it's hard to honestly say, because you don't know where that child's at.
Right.
But it's frustrating at the same time, because it's like you want them to speak English around you, and you feel like they could learn it. But then again, on the other hand, it's like you can't just like throw somebody in the pond and say swim, because they're going to sink. And
Right.
I feel like that child going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what you're saying, I need help, but it's just like you're immersing me in this English and I have no clue what you're saying. And I feel like that's going to lead to a lot of dropping out. And that's the scary part about going English only. But I mean, I don't know, it's basically it's really hard to, in this day and age, it's really hard to what am I trying to say? To really juggle the situation, because it's a very touchy subject with how do you want to work this.
Right. And I think that's why it's been so controversial too. It's because it's 2018, and I mean, to be blunt, immigrants are everywhere.
And they are.
Non-native, people who don't speak English, very little English to any English at all, are everywhere. And like, it's never the child's fault. The child didn't choose to, say, mommy and daddy put me in America, and now I'm in an English speaking classroom and I have no idea what's going on. So does that go against No Child Left Behind? I mean, I absolutely think it does, because if we're leaving out that child, then that completely goes against what we're aiming for as an education system, bringing up No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
It's complete exclusion, in my opinion. But then again, it does get touchy, and it's challenging. But you surely can say that. But then you can also say, well, it's creating job opportunities for people who, whether it's speaking or English as second language teachers in the classroom. I think that it can provide job opportunities for those teachers with Spanish background. So that's kind of an incentive for students, and that's teachers, and that's in high demand right now, because our immigration rates are so high, and there's so many particularly Spanish speaking students in our classrooms, particularly in North Carolina as a whole. So in my opinion, I can see where it gets very challenging with having to accommodate, like Ashley, you said the word accommodate, having to accommodate those students, because at one point are we just going to have a classroom of all immigrants at this rate, with how much people are migrating? I don't know. And how would you handle that? I think that English only is really not the answer, but I can see why people would think that, such as the federal government, state governments, lobbyists, private citizens, like we mentioned earlier, who are for that. this is America. If you want to come to our country, we have to understand you. You have to speak our language. I think that that's exclusion. I think that if you come here, like we mentioned earlier, do it quote unquote the right way. If my family is working hard and paying our dues, then you should too. You know what I mean? That's just my personal opinion. So in that sense, yes, it would be nice if you could understand, what I'm saying as a teacher. But I think that could create job opportunities for teachers to pull aside, especially on the English. I don't know if you guys have been in a classroom before where you have those 3 or 4 students who do step out of the classroom when the teacher is, delivering a lesson that is more English sentence structure related. But is that putting that child at fault for, are they missing out? I think that extra special instruction is needed, obviously, especially for students who don't speak any English at all. But I think just eliminating the fact that, we're not Spanish speakers, we don't teach Spanish, will put us at a disadvantage, because I think anyone can agree that, on a job resume, you are able to interact with people and different types of people in different languages. You don't have to be fluent in Spanish or in French or whatever language it may be. But I think having that under your belt is beneficial to function. You kind of have an upper hand because you're able to communicate with many diverse people and cultures in our society, which seems to be on the uptrend in America. But does anyone else besides Ashley have any comments or questions to go off of that?
Actually, I think one reason why people might be so against bilingual education is because honestly they're worried, they're afraid,
Right.
How are we going to put this in place? What's going to happen? Is this going to come out of my taxes?
Right.
Teachers might be afraid, am I going to lose my job because I can't speak another language?
Absolutely.
And I can see that side, but then there's also you and Ashley were saying, technically under No Child Left Behind, we have to accommodate the students. We have to. I mean,
hello? Oh, okay. Dr. Stone?
Do you have something to say, Dr. Stone?
Hello?
I think she was muted.
Dr. Stone? This is like code.
Yeah, I think she was muted.
Hey, Dr. Stone, you
I am
shut off so
mute.
I can try to unmute you? Because I think it might be because you're muted. Okay, let's look. Dr. Stone.
Hello, hello, hello.
Oh, that's you.
Hello.
Hello. Now I know what you guys do to be able to talk. You mute me. No, but go ahead, Taylor. What you guys have been saying is like really interesting. So go ahead.
Like I was saying, I just think people are afraid. It's not, some people it's totally because, this is America, we speak English. And then there's others that are like, that might be a good idea, but how is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect my job and my life? And stuff like that. So
I think we have to look at, did you guys discuss, and I'm sorry I came late, have you discussed the political implications of English only? That it didn't just originate in the school system, it's actually a national phenomenon?
Yeah, we kind of touched on that a little bit. I kind of introduced the fact.
Did you talk at all about 1983 and John Tanton and U.S. Senator S.I. Hayakawa?
I did discuss John Tanton. And
what's interesting is S.I. Hayakawa is the professor of a very famous book on semantics that you study if you're studying interpersonal communication. So he's all about linguistics and communication. And obviously his last name is not Smith. And how he lent himself to this conversation is beyond me. But I'm just thinking, you know, as I think back to when I taught in Miami, I think a lot of this has to do with the cultural continuum. You know, you guys and I, we've been talking about cultural continuum and how you go from destruction to being able to work freely in a cultural setting, right? Destructiveness. You guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Right.
And so you think about it and you go, well, what is the purpose here of English only? We go back to also, what's the difference between society and culture? And up to now, we've had no real conflict because everybody who migrated here had to learn English. Why? Because we've talked about it before. We didn't have these big bulks of people coming that spoke the same mother tongue, right? And you had Russians and you had Germans and you had French and Norwegians, and everybody had a commonality in that they had to speak one language, which was the King's English. And so from that moment on, everybody had no problem learning English because we're not going to learn 1,000 other languages. This is the first time that we've got a bulk of people coming from a geographic location where they share the same language. And so my question is, you know, is this just a school problem or is this a deeper political problem? Is it based on fear? If it's based on fear of losing control, if you will, to those people might take over. Well, having taught at Miami-Dade, I'm going to tell you something. We were all bilingual. There were very, very few. I mean, I can count on one hand the teachers that were not bilingual, okay? But all of us are, without it having to even be inbred in us or even brought to our attention, we all knew that the end result here was that these kids would be fluent in English. I mean, there was no problem. And I remember, let me think, where was it? There was a state somewhere, I don't remember, but there was a state where a kid was actually expelled for speaking Spanish in the hall or something like that. I mean, really? We're going to waste school time and energy because a kid spoke Spanish in the hallway? You know, do we not have more important things to do with mass shootings and all this other stuff? You know, we taught bilingual education, yes. We taught so that these kids would learn English, and lucky for us, we were able to communicate in their mother tongue. But let me tell you, at the end of the day, the kids, they learn English. They want to learn English. They all learn English. The other day I was at the grocery store and this little beautiful little 4-year-old girl in Harris Teeter was yakety-yakketing away in Spanish, and she was just something else. God bless America. And she was being taught at home how to do her ABCs in Spanish and her 1, 2, 3s. That little kid didn't speak a drop of English, but let me tell you, that kid will be fluent in English because they all end up learning the dominant language. You know, we just don't have a legal language in this country. And if you want to make a legal language and say, okay, for the sake of society, let's make English, fine. But is it truly pro-English or is it anti-Spanish? That's my question.
I think it's more anti-Spanish because I think that so many people are they're just afraid that with more people coming in speaking a different language that, you know, what you said earlier, they're going to take over. But it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be us versus them. It's they came to our country, we're all here together, you know, let's make this work. Not, you know, you need to speak English. I mean, because like you said, they're going to learn to speak English.
They will. I was taken to Mexico. Nobody sat me down and said, you better learn Spanish.
Right.
I learned it. Where did I learn it? I learned it on the streets. I learned it. Listen, I go and I teach every summer in Peru. Everybody who is involved in business, everybody who's involved in any type of education, whether it's medicine or you're in university setting, everybody, even those who don't necessarily have a formal education, you're involved maybe in IT or something like that. Everybody I met down there, they all have some level of English knowledge. Why? Because they want to. Why? Because it's good for their business. Mm-hmm. It's the international language. It ain't going away. It's just not going away. People come to this country not because they want to change our country. They want to join us. They want to be like us. But they just don't want to stop being themselves, but they want to be like us. I can tell you that firsthand. They all want, if they come to live here, they want to be part of the American dream and the America with Mickey Mouse and everything. You know, and part of that is speaking English.
And I think part of it is a lot of people here think that, well, that's going to give them more advantages than us, but that shouldn't matter. You know, we shouldn't get angry because somebody else is successful, more successful than us. If you want to be successful, that's your job. It's up to you. You can't get mad at other people for having advantages for taking advantage of what was given to them and making it multiply and really making something out of themselves. You can't get mad at them for doing that just because you didn't choose to do that.
And can we say the truth? The truth is that the English language in and of itself is declining in this generation. With the new technologies of the texting and all the ways and methods, it is destroying the English language and also the slang that's used. And I dare not enter into certain racial areas, and I'm not, but the reality is what constitutes a language, okay? So if we're not speaking the English language, you can't have an anti-Spanish law only, right? You have to have it against all other languages. So what really constitutes you speaking English? If you're talking in double and triple negatives and all this type of stuff, that's not English. You know, ain't got no is not English. So everybody's going to have to clean up their act and start speaking real English. I'm not saying have an English accent from England, but let me tell you, there's a long way to go with speaking proper English in this country. Do you understand what I'm saying, guys?
Yes.
So if we're going to start picking on people to start speaking English, it's going to open up a whole ball of wax on, okay, you want that? Fine. Here we go. Everybody's going to have to now up their game. Can you imagine people policing you because you are speaking Southern? You know, what English are we going to speak here? What is the proper dialect of English? Shall we go to New York City and tell them to stop speaking that way? You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, we can go crazy on this, can't we?
I just think it's a lot. People are afraid. I mean, I think that's the base of why people feel this way. They're just scared of change. But it doesn't matter if you're afraid of change because change is going to happen regardless.
I think it's not only the fear of change, but the fear of the unknown. Because if you sit here and think about it, there's all these people we don't know who they are, where they're coming from, what they're coming from, and here they are trying to tear down doors to get here. And with the media hyping it up, it makes them look like, oh, they're just coming here like ravages, just going to tear down everything. But if you really truly look at it, they're trying to get away from it. So, I mean, it is definitely fear of the unknown, fear of change. But, I mean, it definitely, what Dr. Stone was saying goes back to what I was saying earlier. This day and time, if you change one thing, you are going to have to change everything. And I've had people correct me all the time, I mean, on Facebook and everywhere else. And it frustrates us when we're talking to somebody and they're like, you know, you're saying that wrong. You shouldn't say that like that, or this, that, and the other. And it frustrates us, but we don't think of other people. This generation, this day and age only thinks of themselves, what's going to benefit them for themselves, and they're not seeing how it affects other people. So it's frustrating in a way that people don't want anyone correcting them, but they want to correct everybody to fit their perfect world, and that's not true. There's not a perfect world. We're going to have to deal with the change and figure out how to make the best of it. And like everyone's saying, they're going to learn English. They want to come here to be a better person, to make a life for themselves. And as Taylor was saying, they're here to live the American dream. And I mean, if they can do it and come from horrible times, we have it good compared to them. We can't do it, so why are we getting agitated with people who's willing to come digging tooth and nail to make a dream, and we have it handed to us? We just don't want to do anything with it. So I mean, it is definitely the fear of change, but we can't let that stop and create this whole ball of negativity that's pushing people apart. And that's another thing. It's just pushing everybody apart, and it's causing all this big chaos, a big ball of mess. But it's really thanks to media and how they're portraying it. So
I mean, it comes down to manners as well. It comes down to etiquette and courtesy and knowing how to live with people. When I was a child, we were never allowed to speak English in front of a group of Hispanics who didn't speak English. We were never allowed to speak Spanish in front of a group of people who didn't speak Spanish. My parents did not allow it. I mean, we got into big trouble, my brother and I, if we ever did that. Why? Because there's nothing worse than feeling like people are talking about you, is there? I mean, you hate to be excluded, right? I mean, have you guys ever gone to get your nails done and all the Vietnamese people are talking Vietnamese, and you know they're talking about you? You know they're saying stuff like, look at this lady, you know, isn't she weird looking? I mean, you know that. But see, in that case, I can talk to them about it and tell them that makes me feel uncomfortable. Would you please refrain from doing that? They're going to do it in the back anyway. Or I can simply choose to take my business elsewhere to another Vietnamese place where they're all going to talk about us. But anyway, but in the school system, what I used to tell my students is, listen, if you need to talk Spanish, you raise your hand and you tell me what it's about privately. And if you need to say the word in Spanish out loud, then I will translate for you. But we are going to try our best to speak in a language in class that everybody understands. And we know that, Manuel, you have a limit here, and or whatever, Maria, Manuel, you, whatever. But we're going to encourage you, because as a teacher, you're setting the tone for the classroom that we are a group. We are a family. And so you have the other students understand, Manuel isn't talking about you. Manuel just doesn't know how to say it in our way, but we're going to help Manuel. It's not, oh, Manuel is dumb or Manuel is saying something about me. Now, if you've got 20 kids that are all Hispanic and one kid who's an English-speaking person, which is how it can be in Miami, and all of those kids are yakety-yakketing in Spanish, I shut that down fast. Why? Because it's something that's going to take away from the cohesiveness of the class, right?
Right.
But it has nothing to do with the culture or with me saying this is right or this is wrong. It's the same as if you had all girls but one boy. You know, you need to make sure that you use illustrations in class that are going to, you know, speak to his masculinity as well as to their femininity. You're going to make sure that your classroom is cohesive. It has nothing to do with anti-girl and pro-boy or anti-boy and pro-girl. It just has to do with what is the best thing for our group here to become one solid family. And I think it goes beyond even language. It's anything that's going to make your group split apart. When I was going to school in South America, there were basically 3 groups in my very small school. We had the people that were embassy children whose fathers and mothers worked at the embassy. And then we had the people whose mothers and fathers worked for American companies. And then we had the missionary kids. Well, the missionary kids were the bottom of the totem pole. Our parents didn't make any money. And, you know, we didn't live in luxury. We just lived normal little, you know, humble lives. But when we got into the classroom, many times you did not have a teacher that was sensitive to the fact that there was a pecking order. And so they would allow for the differences among us to be really stirred up, like, oh, did you guys go to the party that they had at the embassy and all that? And then there would be 2 of us over here that didn't go to the party. Why? Because we're missionary kids. And so there really was this us and them feeling. And I think the us and them is what we don't like. What do you guys think? The us and the them. Whatever it is. I mean, can y'all think back to a time in school when it was an us and them moment for you?
When wanted us and them moment. I mean, it's from kindergarten on up to high school and even in our college and adult years.
I think it's life. Sorry to cut you off, but I go on. I think no. I just wanted to say I don't even think it's in school. I think that there's always it's society. It's
Yeah.
life.
It's
culture.
just like people are always competing with each other. It's always, I want to be better than you, or I want you to do this because this is what I want, or
Right.
just the
So
way
I
our
think
nation
limiting,
is.
I think putting fences up early on kids and just avoiding that challenge, like this is English only and y'all can't speak anything but English. That's it. Nope, 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 nope. I think we really lose the opportunity to teach our kids a greater lesson. How do we overcome our differences to become one productive society that's multicultural? And that's the reality of life. And if we don't start teaching them in the school classroom how we are going to live together, how we're going to celebrate our differences, but come together and function as a well-heeled society, I think that we're missing the point. You can't legislate morality. You can't legislate manners. You can't legislate what's in the heart.
Yeah.
And I would rather have a class where I touch the children's hearts and I tell them, show them, let's see things from a different perspective. What can we do that brings us together rather than what can we do that's going to tear us apart? That's my 2 cents worth.
Well, I feel like it's just thinking about it with a constitution, it's freedom of this and freedom of that. And then you look at it and this is what they're coming for. They want their freedoms. But then when they get here, it's like, I can't even speak my own language. Like, why are you pushing me to do this? And then it gets to feel like, are we really a democracy or are we leaning towards a bureaucracy now? And then that's going to affect everyone in the end. And I feel like there's blinders on when people are thinking about these things, and it's like, okay, it's only going to affect them. But when the smoke clears, it's not just affecting the immigrants, it's affecting everybody. If you do this for them, then it's just going to be a domino effect of things that's going to affect everybody else that people don't realize in the beginning until it's said and done. And then I feel like it's going to lead the United States into a whole different spiraling effect of madness, and it's not going to be the United States no more. We're going to be divided, and it's going to be a hot mess, I feel like. So, I mean, I don't know if that's where it's leading to, but I feel like that's where we're headed if we keep on putting up these roadblocks with different little things, and it's not just like speaking the immigrants and just the language. I feel like it's everything we do. They say we have freedom to do this, but then it's like, okay, we have freedom until you cross this line. And it's like, well, you can't do this. Well, you got this freedom, but you have to do it like I want you to do it because I don't feel comfortable otherwise.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I feel like it's like either people are indifferent about it, they don't want to think about it, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to hear about it, none of that, or it's a lack of compassion. Because, I mean, being a teacher, you're if I'm being honest, you're not going to be a good teacher if you are not compassionate. You don't have to necessarily know several languages to be a good teacher, even to students who speak another language, but you do need to be compassionate. You need to understand the student. If you don't have compassion, you're not going to be a good teacher. You're not going to be able to work with the children.
Let me tell you, having lived overseas, I can tell you that people who would come down who didn't speak a lick of Spanish many times had much more meaningful communication with the people because you can tell in their eyes that you love them. You can tell your demeanor, your aura, your spirit. It lets the children know, listen, I can't talk your language and you can't talk mine, but you can communicate. And kids can tell whether you love them or you don't. And yes, I'm using the word love because love is patient, love is kind. We're taught that in the New Testament. And we have to love the children that we teach. You don't have to like them, you have to love them. And I didn't like all the children that I teach. And maybe I don't like all the students I teach now. I like you guys, don't worry about it. But, you have to get into that love. What does it mean to love your students? It means to see them for who they are, but to love them. And you guys are very right that you just have to do your best and to communicate with and just love them. Let them know that you care about them, you like them. How many of us have had teachers that we knew that they didn't like us? You just knew it. And they were speaking English. And how much harm did they do to us? You know? My humble opinion.
Well, I think we've had a really good conversation so far. If anyone has any like last words or anything that they want to say, I think that we covered a lot. So, Dr. Stone, should we go into the next podcast, or should we go into another?
Why don't we cut this one, and then we can edit it, and then I'll edit it.
Okay.
And then we will go or it will be edited, shall we say.
Okay.
And then we'll all meet back for the second one and take about a 5-minute. Let's start at 5:00, okay?
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks. That was fun.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye.